Anyway, under Innocent III and his successors, a whole lot of people were killed. Dissenters were killed, and it helped keep down dissent for a time. Eventually, though, there came a time when dissent became so bad that the church could not keep it down. Universities began. The first university was in Bologna, Italy. B-O-L. The next university, the first university north of the Alps was in Paris, France. Then another university formed in Oxford, England. I may know more about that, but the first one was in Bologna. And basically the university at this time consisted of a man who had a lot of knowledge, would collect a bunch of younger students, and he and his student would wear gowns. And this was the beginning of the wearing of gowns. Now, as recently as about 100 or so years ago, if I were teaching 100 years ago, I'd probably have come to class with a gown on. The professors would wear the gowns. They don't anymore.
You said it was in
Bologna, Italy, yeah. In fact, today, I mean, I don't do it, but a lot of professors come to school dressed in ragged blue jeans and tennis shoes. I consider that unprofessional. I mean, I do. Because in my day, when I was younger, they had to wear a suit and tie. Today we don't, but I just can't bring myself. And I have ragged blue jeans and I have tennis shoes at home, but I don't wear them here.
When I was growing up, they could
okay. But anyway, the universities became degree-granting institutions, and they had 3 degrees: the bachelor's degree, the master's degree, and a doctorate. You had to have a master's degree to teach at university. A bachelor's degree basically meant you were knowledgeable in a field, and the doctorate meant that you were top in the field. They began granting degrees. And yes, when I was young, I had a dream of getting a doctorate, but it was a dream that I was not quite able to fulfill. And now that I can go back to school for free, I don't really even want to go.
Don't the degrees go associates, bachelor's, master's?
Well, we have more degrees than that today. We have the specialist degree, we have the associate degree. They didn't have that then. Bachelor's, master's, and doctorate were the 3 degrees they had then. Okay, scholasticism. The scholastics tried to, here was the inevitable happening. As they learned more, eventually certain parts of their faith came into conflict with their knowledge. The scholastics tried to reconcile faith with reason, and this is something that, by the way, is still going on. And folk, if you study other religions, Christianity, to me, seems to have less conflict with science than do the other religions. I mean, in Greek mythology, when the gods made the first woman, they sent her from heaven to earth, and on her way down to earth, she passed by the stars and tried to reach out and put her finger on the star and grab one, but the stars just slipped between her fingers. I mean, this is Greek mythology now, not, yeah, I understand. Again, you don't find that in Christian writings. But nevertheless, there is still a conflict between science and theology. I think a lot of it is that science itself is wrong. And also, theology is subject to interpretation, and sometimes our interpretation might be wrong. But they had it back then. Aristotle was a big, you might say they dug up Aristotle. Aristotle had been sitting in the monastic shelves for generations, more than 1,000 years. But 1,000 years later, they dug up Aristotle's writings, and he became really, really famous. And in spite of the fact you cannot call Aristotle a Christian because he lived some 300 years before Christ. But nevertheless, they dug up his writings and began to hold on to them. And of course, Aristotle was notorious for having said one time that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones. And this created a conflict between plain old common sense and reason. Galileo was later to prove Aristotle wrong on that count. There's a story told by a man named Bacon one time that a bunch of scholars got together to try to find out how many teeth the horse had. And they paged Aristotle, they paged Plato, and none of them had it. And some young man who didn't know but said, hey, there's a horse right outside. Why don't you go out, open its mouth? They're scolding, you don't belong with us. They kicked him out. Once they kicked him out of the room, they went on and discussed the issue farther and finally decided, we can't find the answer in any of our writings, so the answer is, the question is unanswerable. Francis Bacon, I believe, told this one. But anyway, famous story from the Middle Ages. But now, a certain man came along. Every once in a while, you get a man who tries to explain the universe. Thomas. He believed he could explain everything. Now, some of the men I'm talking about who have explained the universe, I'm talking about men who explain the universe, every one of us, for all we try it, but who explain it in such a way that others would agree with them, and for generations agree with them. Among them were men like Plato explained the universe his way. Aristotle turned around and explained it differently. Plato involved a lot of spirituality. Aristotle involved none. Thomas Aquinas obviously involved a lot of spirituality, but he tried to explain the universe. Later on, Newton was to do the same thing, and then Einstein. Each of these men had their theories.
He's a patron saint of scholar.
What's that?
Thomas Aquinas.
He was a scholar,
He's
scholastic.
The patron saint of scholar.
Say that again?
The patron saint of scholar.
Yeah, patron saint of scholars. Thank you for reminding me of that. He's the patron saint of all scholars. He is highly regarded among Catholics to this day, and not so highly regarded outside the Catholic Church. But he explained the universe in such a way that his explanation went down for several generations. And again, he said he could answer every question that existed. Today we have scientists who will tell us that there's some things that we're just not going to be able to answer. Some things we cannot explain. And even some have said there's some things that's not even going to be explained. And I want to say this about theoretical science. There's two types of science. There's practical science is where we make better automobiles every year, better radios, better televisions. The television you're watching today is much, much better than the old black and white TV that I had to watch when I was, I hate to say it, when I was your age.
You say that like you're so old. You're so young.
Thank you. I'll be 70 in a few months, 6 months.
That's young nowadays.
That's
young,
young. It's
yeah.
true. All right. Anyway, Thomas Aquinas. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's practical science. We've been building better television, better gadgets, better computers. That's practical. Now, theoretical science, theory of gravity, theory of relativity, theory of evolution. Every theory we have has some compelling reason why it cannot be right. What about the theory of gravity? The theory of gravity works inside the solar system. Get outside the solar system, there's not enough gravity to hold the galaxies together. Well, how do they stay together? We don't know. Why do the galaxies seem to be moving away from us at 25,000 miles a second? What supplies the energy for them to move at that speed? I'll give you a hint. I don't know. But every theory we have has some compelling reason why it just cannot be right. And, Einstein spent his last year working on what they call the TOE, a theory called the theory of everything. He believed he could explain, and in 1950, scientists thought we'd split the atom. We almost can explain everything. All right, now, 68 years later, if anything, we realize, we're not more in the dark than we were then. It's just we realize we're in the dark. But anyway, Thomas Aquinas. At this time, Latin was beginning to be replaced by the spoken language, or you might say the vernacular. V-E-R-N-A-C. The vernacular means the local spoken language, rather than the spiritual language that Latin had become. Now, cathedrals. I want to emphasize this because most of you will see this on the tape. There were two types, the Romanesque and the Gothic. The Romanesque cathedrals, they had barrel roofs. In other words, the barrel roof means they were shaped like a wigwam, kind of. They had barrel roofs. They were sturdy. and they were dark. The Gothic cathedrals, they had pointed arches, like so. They had a lot of stained glass windows. They were bright and light inside, at least in the daytime. And everything seems to be pointing skyward. They were ribbed. Now what do I mean by ribbed? I mean by ribbed, I mean they might say the beams create the impression of being ribbed. Ribbed vaults with, again, a whole lot of stained glass windows. Now, the word Gothic, as I used here, it has nothing to do with the Goths. And we don't know why they're called Gothic cathedrals. About this same time in India, the people of India were also building a lot of magnificent cathedrals, particularly the Buddhists. We do not know if the Buddhist monks ever visited Europe or if Europeans ever visited India at this time. The trip would have been a long one, but they might have, but we don't know how much influence the India people or the European people had over each other.
Is our final next Monday or Wednesday?
What's that?
Is our final next Monday or Wednesday?
Final is when, oh, I'm glad you asked that. I assumed you know. It's on the syllabus, folk.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was like a
No, Monday
syllabus
is
for all
class.
of them.
Monday is our last day of classes. The final exams start on Tuesday.
Okay.
So I will be holding a class on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah, I will be holding class on Monday. Anyway, and the final exam is on Wednesday. We'll get it. I have both finals on the same day. In some ways, I like that because I get it over early. Get it over with early.
Same time?
The final exam is at 8:30. Yes, on that. And then for the afternoon class, I think it's at 2 instead of 2:30, but I have to look that up.
Oh, you did it 2 o'clock, the other class?
I have a 2:30 class.
Yeah.
But I think the final, I don't know if it's the same time or not. I have to look that up. But for this class, it's 8:30.
Cool.
Yeah, 8:30, final exam right here. I'm glad you asked that, because I don't want any of you to miss it. And some of your classmates appear to me to have stopped coming to class. You all know the penalty for that. I mean, there's nothing else I can do for nothing. And I'm not going to call them. I'm not.
Don't.
I've been told I should. I mean, I'm sorry.
No, you shouldn't.
For you folks who are here, I'll break my back for you. But for those of you who aren't, oh, all right. He usually doesn't miss. All right, anyway, all right, I'll leave him at. All right. Now, alchemy. I really don't want this to be seen, but here's what was my favorite joke some years ago. Step 1. Step 3. Don't worry about it, this is just a bunch of junk equations. Now, here's the catch. All right, then a miracle occurs. The instructor was telling his pupil, this is what the assignment the pupil turned in. The instructor said to him, now wait a minute, you're going to be more specific in step 2. What does this have to do with the lesson? All right, the subject is alchemy. Your physics teacher and your chemistry teacher will tell you that the alchemists never transmuted baser metals to gold. Because it can't be done, it's impossible. The alchemists were the chemists of the Middle Ages, and they would try to transmute, particularly, now, they used lead, they'd try to transmute lead to gold. They used lead and salt and sulfur and possibly mercury. Folk, as much as it can't be done, the documentation tells us it was done. Once it was even done in front of one of the popes. An alchemist came into the papal office and transmuted some lead into gold in front of one of the popes. There is in a museum a piece of lead, it's lead on one side and gold on the other, where the alchemists and all right, go ahead and tell me if you want to, that it can't be done, it's impossible.
Nope.
It can't be done. All right, go ahead.
They actually did an experiment. I can't remember what they turned into gold, but they did it, and it used massive amounts of energy, and they just slammed the particles together, and it created like, I think maybe like 10 atoms of gold or something.
They used heat. All right, that's known. The alchemists would mix these chemicals in a cauldron of sorts and use heat. But anyway, but I'm glad you said that. It supposedly is done. Now,
I just
again,
read that.
Yeah.
But it cost, I think it was $5,000 to produce this small, tiny amount of gold. So the cost of gold is so much less than the amount
Well,
it costs to produce it.
what I think. Now, let me tell you
The thing
something.
began with B. I think
Right.
it began with B.
I'm going to get back to the original point I was trying to make. Everybody who has looked into it in recent times has sooner or later had to put it down, because it apparently gets involved in some magic and spirituality of a sort that a lot of us can't handle. And yet, I mean, to me, I think, the man who wrote the paper about the pyramids is not here right now, but I tried to tell him that I think there was a lot of spirituality involved, a lot of, and they used demon spirits to transport themselves to other planets. I mean, I'm not supposed to say that in the state school, but I've said it, I'm on the record, I know it, and I'm being recorded, I'm not gonna cut it out, it's, as I'm saying it, believe what you will, folk. But this is what I think about alchemy. And everyone who looks into it sooner or later has to put it down. Sir Isaac Newton did not know the difference between science and magic. And so because Sir Isaac Newton was brilliant, they gave him some papers one day, and Newton had a nervous breakdown. After that, he never made another discovery, big discovery, but he was famous, he made him famous. But he never did look at those papers again. And of course, if you read a biography, they say, oh, he had all kinds of reasons to have a nervous breakdown. His mother, whom he loved dearly, died. He was about to go before a judge who just hung 250 men. The king was against him. By the way, that King James was soon deposed. But nevertheless, the king was against him. He wanted to finish his Principius, so he worked 20 hours a day. So between working 20 hours and his mother dying and facing a really, really cruel judge, I mean, a lot of men would have a breakdown for other reasons. But also, he was working with these papers, secret papers. He had a breakdown, and he went insane. He slammed everybody around him. Now later, when he came to his senses, he wrote letters of apology, which was accepted, and said, I was ill, and all the stuff I said about you, I didn't mean, and I'm sorry I said it, and I regret saying it. I mean, he apologized for having said it, but he never looked at those papers again. All right, again, believe what you will, folk, but alchemy was a big thing in the Middle Ages. All right. Okay.